Curds aren't something you find in recipe books today, at least very often, but in the 18th century, it was a common ingredient. In this episode, we're doing a wonderful curd fritter. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking. This recipe is from Eliza Smith's Compleat Housewife from 1758. Very interesting recipe. The first thing we really need here are curds. And what we're gonna do today is to make curds for this recipe. You may be able to find curds in the grocery store today. They're definitely becoming a more popular item. If you can't find them in the store, they're very easy to make. In order to make curds, we need rennet. Rennet is an enzyme that's found in the lining of calves' stomachs, and it's there to make it so that the milk that comes in curdles immediately, and it's to make it digestible for the calf. Today we're using animal rennet that we purchased online. And in the 18th century, they would have used something that was essentially the same thing. They would have had a calf's stomach that they would have dried, they would have sliced that into tiny pieces, and they would use a tiny little piece to put into their milk to curdle it. But really, what's happening here is almost exactly the same thing. The recipe calls for a handful of curds. We've got about a half a gallon here. This should yield approximately 8 ounces of curds. I'm guessing that's a handful. I've put the milk down here by the fire. I want to get it to blood warm, just under 100 degrees. So I don't want to put it over the fire. I don't want to risk cooking it, heating it up too much. Just by the fire. Make sure to stir this while you're heating it up slowly. And if you're doing it by the fire like I am, make sure to cover it so you don't get too many ashes in the milk. So it doesn't really matter what kind of milk you use, either 2% or whole milk, but it does matter whether it's ultra pasteurized or not. You can use standard pasteurized, homogenized milk for this, but if it's ultra pasteurized, it's just not gonna work. The temperature is perfect. It's taken a little while, but let's get this over and put the rennet in it. The rennet procedure is pretty simple, but we have to do it right. We need approximately a half a teaspoon for this amount of milk of the liquid rennet. I'm stirring this into a quarter of a cup of non-chlorinated water. Now let's add this to our milk, but we can't just dump this in. We need to slowly drizzle it around so that it gets in here very evenly, just a little bit at a time. And now I'm gonna give it one very gentle stir. And now I'm gonna set this aside, the spoon aside. Maybe I'm gonna cover this up and let it rest for 15 or 20 minutes for this curd to set up. It's been 20 minutes, it's time to check the curd to see if it's ready to work with. The way to test the curds to see if it's ready is to stick your finger or a knife in, sort of like this, tilt the blade up, and if you see that the curd breaks cleanly, it's ready. Now we need to cut the curd, and we cut the curd so that it can release its whey. We cut it in a crisscross pattern all the way to the bottom, about a 3/4 inch wide strips, one way and then another. And now I'm gonna come in and actually cut it at an angle, 45 degrees away from my grid and 45 degrees at an angle in, again, to help release that whey. And we'll do this in the opposite direction just one more time. Now we're going to let this set another 20 minutes to a half hour so that it can continue to release the whey completely. Well, after half an hour, you can definitely see that the whey is separated from the curd. Once the whey is separated, you're going to want to put this back by the fire for a good 20 minutes, trying to bring this up to a temperature of, say, 110 degrees or so. This will help it separate out a little bit better. Line a sieve with cheesecloth. Now we can pour our curds in. Once I have this tied up, I can hang it so that it can drain completely. Okay, so we had difficulties with the curd here at the campfire, at the campsite. You really need to keep these up to the right kind of temperature or they're not gonna separate, right? So we had to fight our curds. So the curds are ready. Now it's time to make the batter. We have a handful of flour. To that, we're gonna add our spices. We've got some nutmeg here, maybe a quarter of a nutmeg, some mace, maybe a half a teaspoon, and a quarter teaspoon of clove. They kind of go together as a threesome in many of these recipes. And now 2 teaspoons of sugar. We probably don't need a lot here because some of that's gonna go on the top as they come out after they're done cooking. I'm gonna set these dry ingredients aside for just a second and let's bring on our eggs. The recipe calls for 10 eggs. Now, 18th century eggs might have been a little bit smaller, so you might not need so many if you're using regular large eggs from the grocery store, maybe 8. I got 10 eggs here. I'm gonna whisk these up, put them in the big bowl, and now I'm gonna sift in the dry ingredients to try to get this all mixed in nice, right? Okay, that's looking good. Let's put the curds in. I'm gonna break these up with my fingers and put them in the mix and stir it in with the spoon. If it's a little thin, well, you can bring in a little bit more flour. Again, they didn't have exact measurements here. You know, a handful of flour, a handful of curds. You really just have to make your way through this, get it to the right consistency that you feel is gonna work. It should be a thick batter.
And now for a little sugar on top.
Well, here they are. They look really interesting, and I could tell by the way they went in that they definitely looked interesting in that how they were going to turn out. And you can see from this shot internally, they're very eggy and not like, say, an elephant ear that you might be used to. Let's find out what they taste like. Hey, oh, I love the nutmeg in there. I think the cheese is just in there for texture. And the cheese doesn't bring a lot of, kind of a cheesy flavor with it because it doesn't have a lot of salt in it. But you get some of the wonderful egginess. You get the wonderful spices that were in there. And it definitely needed a good bit of sugar up on top because we didn't have a lot in the batter. You might want to put a little bit more sugar in the batter than we did to sweeten it up just a bit more. That way you didn't have to put maybe so much sugar on the outside. A great dish to try out. These fritters are, you've never had anything like them. I can tell you that right now. You know, we struggled with this one, but it still turned out great. I mean, the experimenting, that's part of what we do. I love how this one turned out. I want to encourage you to go over and check out our Facebook page. Like it if possible. We have a lot of great things that are flowing through the Facebook page, and I think you'll enjoy it. I want to thank you for coming along as we experiment, as we try out these things. We never know how they're going to turn out. I love it when we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. If you're new to our channel, I want to welcome you. You can subscribe by clicking the button right up here. Also check out our related videos. Thanks so much for watching.